Good evening. I'm here to talk a bit about, as Mr. Peterson said, what the alternative is to the Common Core. I'm going to begin with a quote that's not going to make a lot of sense, but I'll give it some context. I wore my high school ring for more than 40 years. I wore the ring and will wear it again because although I have degrees from 2 Ivy League schools and have taught at UC Berkeley, Johns Hopkins, Columbia, and Duke, Classical High School in Providence, Rhode Island is the best and the most demanding educational institution I have ever been associated with. The name tells the story. These words come from the most unlikely of sources, the New York Times. The 2010 article was written by Stanley Fish, a regular contributor to the opinion section. Mr. Fish discusses several books published that year which call for a return to classical education for reasons ranging from encountering the wisdom of the ages to high test scores and superior preparation for the workplace. What emerges from a careful consideration of classical education is tremendously ironic, given the emphasis on the Common Core as preparation for the workplace. Classical education emphasizes 3 central stages of educational development. The first is the grammatical stage, which focuses on the structure of things, on the pieces which create a whole. The second is the logic stage, which teaches students to formulate correctly ordered arguments building off the structure learned in the grammatical stage. The third is the rhetorical stage, in which students learn to persuade others of their positions, both in speaking and in writing. The 3-part approach draws on the natural developmental stages of students and ultimately beats Common Core at its own game. Even from a purely pragmatic perspective, classical education provides the skills, such as recognizing both the whole and its individual parts, the ability to formulate and follow a logical argument, and the ability to persuade others through reason that allow people to thrive in the workplace. But these pragmatic skills barely scratch the surface of the real meaning and mission of classical education, especially Catholic classical education. If we consider education merely as job preparation, we are taking the heart and soul right out of the whole process, for everyone involved, teachers and students alike. Where is the wonder, the beauty, the goodness, the heroism, the freedom? Any consideration of classical education requires an intellectual sojourn to the great Greek thinkers. For Aristotle, learning, and of course philosophy especially, ought to begin in wonder. One of the great joys of teaching at St. John Bosco School is being surrounded by children of all ages. And I found it to be one of the greatest defenses of classical education to simply be around the students in the younger grades. Little children are so filled with wonder that they can hardly contain their excitement at everything, from hermit crabs to the Greek Olympic Games. All too often, this wonder, this ability to be excited and filled with joy at the amazing world of which we are a part, can harden into cynicism, especially by the middle school years. But this is one of the greatest gifts of St. John Bosco Middle School. You will find the same wide-eyed wonder and excitement in a 6th grader as in a 1st. As a middle school teacher, I am offered sympathy when I mention what grades I teach, followed by incredulity when I say that I love it. The middle school years are dangerous terrain for parents, teachers, basically for society as a whole. Sorry guys back there. But classical education gives students this age the permission to be precisely where they find themselves developmentally, while simultaneously challenging them to grow into young men and young women. That sense of wonder finds fruition in consideration of the great works of literature, such as Paradise Lost, Beowulf, and Oedipus Rex, stories that are worth reading. Definite highlights of my admittedly still neophyte teaching career include hearing students ask to read Chaucer, watching as they reread Beowulf on their own, and listening to their palpable excitement as we talk about Greek heroes. I know they are really appreciating Shakespeare when they sign cards from Cassius. Their delight in stories stories is coupled with a more mature and logical analysis of what the author or poet is attempting, and of the virtues or vices and complex motivations of the great characters of literature. Great literature, which finds itself under especially venomous attack from the Common Core, finally tunes students' ability to perceive both the objective reality of the story and characters and to give rational, logical voice to their own subjective response to it. Equally important is introducing students to what is authentically beautiful, making them accustomed to and appreciative of the language and rich meaning of Homer, Virgil, Dante, John Donne, and George Herbert. Likewise, the great people and stories of history introduce students to the rich and varied tapestry of the past, without which we know precious little. Although overstated, it is still quite true that those who do not know history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. But equally important are the missed opportunities to meet the heroes and emulate the virtues embodied by those who have come before us. History is, at its most basic level, a narrative, a story, woven through the lives of heroes and villains alike. When imparted as a story, history becomes the ultimate equalizer, uniting students of all intellectual abilities and a common appreciation for the events of the past. Students, especially young men, who may find school fairly dull and sometimes outright boring, and they're not afraid to tell you that, here find themselves standing with Leonidas in the 300 on the fields of Thermopylae, listening to Pericles offer his funeral oration to the mourning families of the fallen, and charging with Caesar across the Rubicon. They find themselves in the mead halls of the Anglo-Saxons, regaled by tales of heroes and monsters, attending the lavish coronation of Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor, venturing to new and distant lands on the Crusades, standing in the great Gothic cathedrals of France, and watching as Michelangelo creates the magnificence we now call the Sistine Chapel. The stories, battles, and personalities that create the rich tapestry of history engage both the natural scholar and those who generally rather be playing hockey, encouraging a love of greatness and an understanding of those on whose shoulders we rest. This encounter with heroes, both in history and in literature, is integrally important to the human development of students in the middle school years. It is in these years that young people are facing new questions, both in themselves and in the world around them. They are beginning to question their belief systems, their parents, their teachers, basically their whole existence. Of course, this is psychologically normal and indeed necessary for them to emerge as fully formed adults. But today, society at large places extra pressures and expectations on these young people, challenges they are not yet ready to face alone. However, at St. John Bosco School, rather than worrying about premature dating, name brand fixations, negative body image, and general confusion about oneself and purpose, students are blessed with an environment in which they can authentically answer these questions, aided by the wisdom of the ages. Modern society would have young people believe that they are easily replaced, that they have nothing unique to contribute to the world. However, at St. John Bosco School, we understand that each person is an unrepeatable, irreplaceable gift of God, and that each person has a unique and beautiful part to play in the human experience. And it is this juncture of life that students must begin to consider what sort of men and women they want to become, and how they can become the heroes of their own stories, and how they want to be remembered. Classical education is part of the tradition formerly known as the liberal arts. Liberal here, of course, comes from the Latin liber, meaning to free. The real purpose of Catholic classical education is teleological. We seek to understand the tremendous dignity of the human person as an unrepeatable gift through the heroes of literature and the lessons of history, the logical structure of math and of Latin, and the wonder of nature studies. Such an education leads students to ultimate freedom, the freedom which can only be found in an encounter with God, whom Dante describes as the love that moves the sun and other stars. Students formed at St. John Bosco School will graduate, in the words of John Milton, with the world all before them, where to choose their place of rest, with Providence as their guide. Thank you for your generous support of St. John Bosco. Enjoy your evening and God bless you.